Now that was 2000 BC. Here we are 4,000 years later, and one of the central disputes of our world is, who does this land belong to? Israel says it's our promised land. The Palestinians, which the word Palestinian is the modern word for the word Philistine. It's the Old Testament word. As a matter of fact, the word Palestine is in the Old Testament, and it refers to the Philistines. The Philistines and Israel fought throughout the Old Testament. All of us know the famous story of David and Goliath. So this is not a new dispute here. When President Clinton said, I'm going to end this once and for all, I thought to myself, hey, this is a 3,000-year-old dispute. You know, Eddie, anyone is foolish to think they're going to solve this problem. This problem is not going to be solved until the Prince of Peace comes. He's the only one that's going to be able to unravel these animosities that we're dealing with right now.
So God made a covenant with Abraham. It concerned the land of Israel. Is this the covenant? Do you believe that this is the covenant that is being referred to in Daniel 9:27?
It looks to me like that it is, Eddie, and here's the reasons why. And let me see if we can work this out together here. What do we know? We know that God made a promise to Abraham concerning the land of Israel. We also know that God made a promise concerning where he would put his name, in the city of Jerusalem. We also know that God instructed David as to what the capital should be. And we also know that God chose the exact site where sacrifices were to be offered unto him. He chose the Temple Mount, Mount Moriah. He chose it the first time when Abraham offered Isaac. That was the mountain that God led him to. And then later on, he said to David, in order to stop the plague which has hit Israel, because you have numbered Israel, you were to go by the threshing floor of Arana, which was located. And he said, from this point on, this is where you're going to do sacrifice. So there's a lot involved here in God's relationship with his physical people of the earth, the nation of Israel. So it looks like to me that this has to be the covenant that we're referring to, and we're going to find as we go through this further that all of the things that happen within the 3.5 years after the confirmation seem to prove that the confirmation has to do with the land of Israel and with the status of Jerusalem. There's one more thing I want to bring up right now. I want to talk about the Jerusalem covenant. When the Oslo Accords were launched back in 1993, the nation of Israel knew full well that the United Nations did not recognize its sovereignty over the city of Jerusalem. When Israel was divided back in 1947, the United Nations actually decided to partition the land and divide it between Palestinians and Israelis. They drew the border. Israelis accepted it. The Palestinians and the Arabics, they did not accept it. Consequently, war broke out the day after Israel declared her independence. Now, but in the beginning, Israel said, or the United Nations said, we're going to divide this land, but we are going to keep Jerusalem for ourselves. There was so much tension over who would control Jerusalem. Will the Arabs have it? Will the Jews have it? The United Nations said, no one will have it. We're going to make it the international city of the world. So they internationalized Jerusalem. Well, when the Oslo Accords came up in 1993, about 3 months before the Oslo Agreement was actually signed in September the 13th of 1993, Israel, knowing that all this was coming down, they knew eventually their control of Jerusalem would be challenged. So someone in Israel drew up a document called the Jerusalem Covenant. And this document states that Jerusalem is the eternal capital of the nation of Israel, must never be divided, must never be surrendered, and must never be shared. Now, this beautiful document is about 6 feet long. It was adopted in May on Jerusalem Day, which is a holiday in Israel. They adopted it that day, and then they marched it to the Israeli Knesset, which is the headquarters for the government of Israel. There were 1,600 prestigious Jews that marched it there. The Prime Minister of Israel signed this document. All the cabinet members signed it. Both chief rabbis of Israel signed it. And they marched the document to the Knesset, the Israeli governmental headquarters. It is right now on display there in a beautiful glass case. They joined themselves together, and the last provision of this covenant was the scripture. If I fail to esteem Jerusalem above my chief joy, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth, let my right hand forget her cunning. So Israel, May 19 of 1993, entered into this covenant concerning Jerusalem, and they were affirming this particular covenant. And at that particular time, Ed, if you'll remember back then, we even wondered, could that be the confirmation of the covenant way back there?
But it turns out it most likely is the establishing of the covenant, which will later be confirmed, because this covenant pertains to Genesis 15:18. This is reaffirming Israel's right, Abraham's descendants, the right to the land.
We know for sure it cannot be the confirmation of the covenant, because 3.5 years after the confirmation of the covenant, you have to have the abomination of desolation. So we know for positive that that cannot be true. We're reaching a juncture here where we're going to need to talk a little bit more about the confirming of the covenant. What is the covenant? God made covenant with Abraham. Now Israel has adopted a document called the Jerusalem Covenant. Back in 1993, when Israel was going to the Oslo peace accords, they knew they would ultimately come under pressure to surrender Jerusalem. Someone wrote a document called the Jerusalem document. It was adopted by the government of Israel, by the prime minister. He signed it. All the cabinet members signed it. Both chief rabbis signed it. They then, on Jerusalem Day, marched it to the Israeli Knesset, where it is now in a beautiful glass case on display. This document states that Jerusalem is the eternal capital of Israel, must never be shared, must never be surrendered, and must never again be divided. The last sentence of this covenant states, if I fail to esteem Jerusalem above my chief joy, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth, let my right hand forget her cunning. So our conclusion is that the covenant is God's covenant with Abraham about the land of Israel, Israel's right to have that land, and of course that includes the right of Israel to Jerusalem itself. All of a sudden we see that this is the issue that is the pivotal issue of the end time, and we're going to find out that that's the issue over which the Battle of Armageddon is fought. So when we talk about confirming the covenant, we're going to talk about confirming Israel's right to the land, Israel's right to the city of Jerusalem.
So we'll not only cover that, what is the confirmation of this covenant, but we're also going to determine who is the he who confirms the covenant, and that's where we're going to see the international community and Israel come together, collide in the event known as the abomination of desolation. And this is where we establish the entire timetable of the timeline of Daniel's 70th week, the final 7 years to Armageddon.
Daniel 9:27 is how we know there's a 7-year period, and we're answering the questions: what is the abomination of desolation? How do we know it's a 7-year period? What is 1 week? We've answered that. Now, what is the covenant? In part 2 of this lesson, we're going to talk about the confirmation of the covenant and how all of these events tie together and ultimately culminate at the battle that's called Armageddon. Remember, it's at Armageddon that Jesus Christ comes back. We crown him King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and that brings in the 1,000-year reign of peace prophesied in the Bible. What a great time that's going to be. So whatever we do, we want to make sure we're ready for that time and understand where we are on the road to Armageddon.
Jesus,